This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, I'd like to call to order the Board of Examining Plumbers for June 7th, 2021. Quick roll call. John Hardy is absent. We do have Greg Mayer, Art Monaco, myself, Chris Schleider, Pat Knapp, ex officio, and Michael Piccirilli, or is it Piccirilli? Michael, I don't want to get that.
Piccirilli.
Piccirilli. So we have a pretty good head count today. We have not met in person since October of 2020. We can go over the business that was discussed at that meeting. We have these minutes typed up and vote to approve these, accept them into the record. New business at the time, Michael asked about future reciprocal agreements with Ithaca and Syracuse. Required more investigation and should be followed up by full board. Syracuse has in the past wanted no part in these agreements, and Pat and I thought that the process would be pretty complicated. Syracuse does not want anybody from another municipality coming into their township and doing business. They do not want to reciprocate. Ithaca has not responded. We don't have any interest from them on taking in from their absence and lack of response and opening up to the city of Edmonton reciprocal agreements. We did recently, have conversations in the Board of Examining Electricians that had some new ideas discussed. We'll talk about those when we get through the minutes. That's our new business. The prior meeting, we also discussed some applicants who were waiting to take the exam, and we had some of them show up and some did not. And we had some that passed and some did not. And I don't know if we have that list.
That was actually for the January test. Yeah, there was only two for that test. One guy passed, one guy failed.
Okay, so in January, we had Josh Harrington and Michael Tessitore. No, that was for electricians.
No, second page, bottom,
Okay.
Miguel.
Deal Socio and David Donovan. Okay, so Miguel may come back. David passed and was granted a license to practice as a plumber in the city of Edmonton. All right, well, the minutes we had from our last meeting, like this meeting will probably, like that meeting, this one will probably be brief, but before we go ahead, make a motion to pass the minutes into the record. Second. Everybody approved the minutes from last meeting in October?
Yep.
Aye. Review licensing exam results. Pat has the licensing exam results from January. Since our last meeting, we've also had another test that was in May. Because we were not meeting in person or we're not able to have a WebEx meeting, the applications for the May exam were delivered to everybody either certified mail or email. Everybody had an opportunity to review those applications. All of the applicants at that time were approved to take the exam. And Pat, do we have a list of people who took the exam in May?
Yeah, first page.
First page, we had 6. 5 out of 6 passed. And one person came very, very close, but did not pass the exam, which had a passing score of 70, came in at 68. The other 5 individuals were granted their licenses practice plumbing in the city of Binghamton. Jason Brownlee, Thaddeus Levitt, Miguel. Miguel came back and passed nicely on the second try. Robert Ambrose and Cameron Keel. So we have some new individuals in the workforce.
Chris, I have a question. These guys that are these guys that are out of town, are they, so like this Jason and this Thaddeus, these are guys that live in Binghamton now, or they just wanted to get their license in the city of Binghamton?
Just wanted to get their license in the city of Binghamton, especially Thaddeus, being that we don't have a reciprocating license with his municipality.
Understood.
He's required to come down here and get one. We won't honor the one that he already had.
Yeah.
Does this tell you anything about the viability of, the economy in town? We have never had this many people approved over the time that I've been on this board.
Good point.
So what's the question then?
The question is, does this tell us anything about the economics that's going on in the city of Binghamton? We've not had this many
Yeah.
people apply since I've been on the board.
Does this mean that economics all over the state are bad and these guys are expanding their territories to get work wherever they can? Or is there that much more work in Binghamton that we need that many new plumbers? I would say it's probably the former over the latter, but that's anecdotal. I don't have any hard data to support that.
Well, it's interesting that we have this many. This is the most I've ever seen approved.
Yeah.
I know a few of these guys are guys that work for companies that want to break off and go do their own thing.
Yeah.
So they want to go independent, getting away from the companies they're with. Maybe a good move on their behalf. I don't know.
Yeah, right. I don't know. These are all basically guys that are going to use this in like a residential.
So they're working in town already.
They're working for like the Roto-Rooters of the world,
Yeah.
people like that, and they want to go and,
They had,
become a one-man band kind of thing.
ironically, they had a very interesting little segment on the TV just before I came over here about how much in demand the plumber is today and what a great profession it is. They got to elevate this whole enterprise to the level of being very professional, very competent.
Yep.
And lifelong employment, and you can make a darn good wage at it.
Yep. And artificial intelligence and automation can't replace it.
Yep.
True. Okay, so we read off the exam results. Do we have any applications for the next exam in September, Pat?
No, not as of yet. The 3 people have called, but nobody's turned anything in.
No applications as of yet. Okay. So the only new business, and it's not really new business yet, but I'll give you a little preview of coming attractions, is we're currently with the Electrical Board of Examiners reviewing the role that corporations have in performing work in their industry in the city of Binghamton. And there's been some barriers in place in the electrical code that prevented that from happening. Specifically stating that you would need to own 25% of that corporation in order to obtain a license to do work here in the city of Binghamton. And what we're finding with one of the newest players in that field is that that was impossible. That it's a publicly traded company with 16 million shares outstanding. And the person who owns, if anybody did own 4 million shares of that, probably are not qualified electricians, but
Yeah.
probably Wall Street guys with an MBA from Harvard. So getting his license wouldn't really do us any good in ensuring that the quality of the work was up to the standards that we've set at the city of Binghamton. So with that, there's been some proposed modifications to that legislation, including allowing corporations to obtain licenses through a licensed employee, provided that that corporation has a physical presence within Broome County or one of the adjacent counties, including an office, vehicles, equipment, and tools, that employee is a verified employee, full-time employee of that corporation and will be the local supervisor for any work done under that permit, which includes providing direct supervision on the job, which ranges from technical interpretation of documents and drawings to answering questions and assistance in the field. So there's a notion that came through that as companies merge and companies grow, we might need to change with the times and keep up.
So what's your thought? They're just going to adopt that for the electricians, that it's going to
I have no
shift over
idea,
here?
Brett, I have no idea what the response is going to be. The request for legislation is being drafted and being worded now. It still has to be presented to city council and to the mayor. It may be beautifully worded with great intentions, but never get off the ground. I have no idea how that's going to come up. But when we start looking at new players in town, if they're breaking away from a big corporation and coming on their own, we don't have any bylaws that address that. That's perfectly acceptable. But if it's a big corporation out of Rochester or Syracuse that's just sending one guy down here, an employee, to get licensed so that that corporation can break into the market down here, it may be something that we would need to consider in the future. I will say I have not read the plumbing code. I've been so immersed in the electrical code. I've not read the plumbing code to see if we have any barriers like that in place. Do you know offhand, Pat? Any kind of?
I don't believe there is. I think it's a lot more vague than the electricians.
Okay. So that may not even be a topic that we need to address, but in your comments earlier of what's going on with the economy, and is it employees breaking off from big corporations, or is it big corporations getting their foot in the door? Well, that's something that we have to think of how we want to respond. Do we just want a representative from a company in Rochester coming down and doing a job, or with the plumbing board also want to see other components put into place, like establishing a local shop, having verified employees, and having that employee not just pull the permit, but be here while the work is being done to provide supervision.
Where does the liability fall in the event something's not installed correctly? Does it fall on the individual who is kind of verifying it for the company, or does it fall onto the company? Or is it both?
Well, not just the quality of the work, it really, who we hold responsible is the property owner in the end. We say if it's done improperly, you don't get a certificate of occupancy. So the punishment goes to the property owner. The question.
That's not a new install though, right? If it's like a renovation,
Even a
you
renovation.
may not even know about it.
If you wanted work done at your house, Michael, you would be the holder of the permit. And if the work wasn't done to code, you won't get a certificate of compliance.
Okay.
Which is then you would be the one who would go to bat with the company and say, well, that's why I hired you, so that this job would be solved with a certificate, not so that you would just cobble it together and say good enough.
I just wonder about the enforcement. I mean, Pat's talked about that a lot, that, we don't have the personnel to enforce what we've got in play right now, let alone a big change like that. How do you enforce that?
That's a good point. And it's not entirely the plumbing board's or the plumbing inspector's responsibility. One of the big issues that comes up is if you are an employee pulling a permit on behalf of a larger corporation and you're using that corporation's workers' comp and disability, those have to be congruent. You can't come in and say, our Monaco is going to pull the permit, but this is for, Giant Plumbing Company out of Texas. Giant Plumbing Company has to actually be responsible for the insurances, and so that has to be reflected on the application. If the insurances are coming from, Giant Plumbing, ABC, then the application has to reflect it. Otherwise, we're going to want to see that workers' comp policy in the applicant's name, Art Monaco. And if he doesn't have his own policy and he's saying, I'm applying, but they're supplying the insurance, we say those don't match. So it's the workers' compensation board who also would want to weigh in on
We talked about that. I remember
whether or
that.
not there's consistencies in the coverage that's mandated by the state. So not our job alone, but it's part of the overall, picture and all the enforcement that goes into place during these jobs. So Pat and I will look at our code and see what's in there now and kind of keep our finger on the pulse of what's happening with different companies coming in. If these are breakaway guys or going out on their own, we really aren't crossing that bridge yet. But if we see big companies from California and Texas and Tennessee coming up here and just, doing jobs consistently, not just a one job, which they're allowed to do one job in 1 year through the Master C program, but then we'll have to respond to that. But just some things to think about as we watch things evolve and we watch the economy change.
I think people perceive in the plumbing business that there's money to be made here. Ohanahi has, expanded their number of employees dramatically.
And that's actually a company who's on the verge of being the type of company that I'm talking about. When a larger corporation comes in and absorbs one of the local outfits.
Yes, they did, right?
Yeah, now we're looking at that and saying, well, does the previous license holder vouch for the bigger company, or does the bigger company, one of the owners of this larger company, have to be the licensed plumber? Now with Ohanahi, one of the owners of the larger company is licensed. So they do conform to that ownership requirement that we've seen on the electrical side. But who's to say that a publicly traded company isn't going to acquire them? At which point,
Well, that's the next rung up, 100%.
right,
Yeah,
at which point now we're looking at a big company from California who just bought the parent company of Ohanahi.
yeah. What they'll usually do is the guys who bought them, they'll want to basically keep that same model, build it up about 5 years and sell it to even bigger guys.
Right. And if that's the way that things are going and that's how the industry is changing, we just have to be prepared to respond with what we think is the best legislation that we can think of to ensure that the plumbing installations are being done safely, properly, and in compliance with the code. And requiring a license from the owner of a publicly traded company does not guarantee that. So we might want to just look at what we have on the books and whether or not we want to model this in a way that's more beneficial to the homeowner who's hiring these companies and to our economy. Because if they're charging sales tax and paying that to a county in California, as opposed to us, or renting office space and leasing vehicles from companies in California instead of locally, then we might want to say we'd like to have a little bit more of that benefiting us here in Broome County rather than, in San Jose.
Right.
So just some things to think about if you get a chance to look at the charter on the website. It's a pretty short chapter for the plumbing code. I think was it 310?
I believe it's 310.
It's a short chapter. You can see what's in there now. If there's something that just doesn't ring true to you, or it just seems like it's not really addressing the conditions that we're facing right now, we can bring that up at the next meeting.
Yeah, so the intent is basically to carve out something or some language where the people that, are involved in a business here.
Are providing quality work.
Yep,
And perhaps even playing in a way that benefits us locally, not only for the quality of the work, but economically, as much as it would the parent company, or at least gives us a little piece of that pie. So.
I know one thing, I've had my furnace looked at a couple times since we've last met. It's complicated work.
it is.
I'm behind
And
you.
most people don't know what they're doing when they come there.
No, they don't. A lot of guys think it's easy to just break off and become, get a van and be a,
I said to the guy, give me an estimate. He writes in one line, $3,000. For what? They came there 6 months ago and did something and charged me $2,500. Now $3,000.
Yeah, they don't itemize very well.
No, they don't itemize at all.
Right.
But I wouldn't let that contract go through. But,
I don't like that kind of work. I really don't.
well, again, it's
That
complicated
service done residential, it's,
because what you're doing is you're having to be responsible for the person who put the furnace in the first place.
yeah, absolutely.
And then it's another story.
Does anybody else have any new business they want to introduce? Good for now. Motion to adjourn. Second, all in favor? Thank you.